In the third and final part of making the sliding barn doors, I'll be building the diagonal braces, sanding, and applying the finish. In order to make the diagonal pieces for the door, I had to resaw a piece of pine in half, since a full piece would have been too thick and would have been proud of the outer frame. I will spare you most of the footage, but here I am sanding one of the tongue and groove panels that goes in the door. I also had to sand all the long vertical rails and the horizontal rails, and as well as the diagonal pieces before I cut them to size. After sanding from 80, 120, and 150, it was then time to apply stain, which you can see here in this shot. The stain is two parts. One is rosewood and the other is brown mahogany, which are water-based stains from General Finishes. I mixed them roughly, I'd say 75 brown mahogany, 25 rosewood. Mixed it together and then applied 2 coats to all the pieces before the glue up. In this glue up, I'm using West Systems epoxy. I'm using their slow hardener for the open time, since as you can see here in the upcoming footage, it's going to take me a while to assemble everything together and get the clamps on it. As you can see, I'm inserting the space balls into the short rails as I work my way up. If you install them too early and you try to slide the boards down, you'll actually end up pulling the space balls out of their appropriate position. I wanted to make sure that there's 2 space balls per board on the horizontal rails, and then 3 space balls per panel along the tongue and groove area. Now moving on to the second section of the door. This one's a little bit more challenging since I have both the upper and lower rail to contend with as I slide the pieces down. On this tongue groove section, I installed a lot of the space balls first in the horizontal rails, but I did find that I had to adjust them off and on to get them in the right position, but it wasn't too bad. I'm applying the epoxy into the mortises here, and as I apply epoxy to the tenons, I'm just using a small wooden stick, like a popsicle stick, to spread it about. And upcoming here, when I release the clamp, is kind of when I realized that this all could fall apart as I pull it off the bench, but luckily it all stuck together due to the tight fit of the mortise and tenons. Alright, after getting the clamps on, I check the door for square using tape measure, measuring across the corners, and if it's square I just leave it sit, move on to the next one. Here are both the doors glued up, and I let them sit overnight while the epoxy dried. Alright, next step here was to cut these diagonal pieces that are decorative that go across the door. It did take me quite a while to figure out what the proper angles of each of the diagonal braces should have been. I used a lot of different cutoffs and different settings on my miter saw and table saw to get it right. One angle is less than 45 degrees, so I was able to use my miter saw on that cut. But the other side of the cut is greater than 45 degrees. I think it was, I want to say it was like 33 and then 57. So I made that second cut on my table saw. It's an iterative process to make these diagonal pieces fit. I just sneak up on it so it's a snug fit. Previously I talked about mixing stain and applying stain. I didn't tape that with the tongue and groove panels or the rails, but here you can see the process that I'm using to apply it to the diagonal braces. It's really just simple. I'll liberally apply it, let it sit on there for 5 minutes, come back with a rag and wipe off the excess and move it aside, and then repeat once more. So here I'm moving on to attaching the diagonal pieces to the door. Before staining, I drilled counterbore and countersink holes into the diagonal pieces for the screws to sit into, and then here I'm attaching them with some short wood screws, and then I glue in a dowel on top of them to cover it up. After allowing that glue to dry for about 30 minutes, I come back with a flush trim saw and a sheet of paper to trim the bosses to length and flush with the surface of the door. Some of them are not perfect, so I come back with a paring chisel and clean them up, and then a little bit of sandpaper. I was also cleaning up the excess epoxy that came out of the seams in this step, and also doing a little bit of sanding. The finish was pretty uneven on some of the tongue groove panels, so I want to sand some of it back and hit it one more time with stain just to even it all out. Something I didn't video was applying that next coat of stain, which I guess would be 3 coats in total, but I probably should have only done one, did some light sanding, and then applied one more to make it even. Here I'm spraying some M-Tech 6000, which is a water-based lacquer. This is my second coat on the doors that you're seeing here. I start by doing the edges and then move my way to the faces, to the large surfaces, applying a pretty liberal coat of finish. Here I'm doing my final investigation after spraying the doors, and they look good, so this wraps up the third and final video. Thanks for watching.